Yeah, well, anyway, I mean, I think the point is we're not even talking about vaccines here. We're talking about pharmaceutical prescription medication as a
Yeah.
baseline is the third biggest killer in America behind heart disease and cancer. So laying that as the foundation, there's two things you've mentioned, and I think they're worth just backing up a little bit here. One is when a drug is approved, the gold standard is a randomized, double-blind controlled trial. And that involves testing a drug against something that's inert, so you know, A, whether it's effective, and B, whether it's causing a side effect. So what you were just saying, and I think our listener may have missed it, it's worth repeating, that no vaccine has had, or not many of the vaccines have had a placebo in an inert placebo matched against it. It's always been another vaccine against one vaccine. Is that what you just said?
I did say that vaccines typically are not tested against a true placebo. Now, there's one exception that we found in one arm of a Gardasil trial where allegedly it was a true placebo, but in the other Gardasil trial, the placebo was very abhorrent to me because it was a very strong aluminum-containing solution. Now, we know aluminum induces autoimmunity. In fact, that's the way that scientists induce autoimmunity in their lab rats, is to give aluminum is one way to do it. And one of the things that was most urgently reported from girls that took the Gardasil vaccine, and this goes back to like 2007, 2008, was that they got autoimmunity as well as something called POTS, which is postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. And so imagine this, if you've got a vaccine that causes autoimmunity and you test it against the control, which also causes autoimmunity, what does that do? That washes out the difference. And that way your vaccine doesn't look as bad in terms of causing autoimmunity. But the best data that I know of suggests that getting a Gardasil vaccine basically doubles your risk of developing an autoimmune illness, which is a terrible thing to have and is also one of the things that's increasing so dramatically in the last 20 to 30 years. So I do think that people make the assumption that vaccines being given so broadly to everyone and given to little tiny babies are going to be so well tested that nobody could begin to question their safety or effectiveness. But when you actually look at how the studies are done, it's disappointing. Another example.
Disappointing. I think that's a nice turn of phrase, Liz, to disappointing. But yes,
I'm a Southern woman, and my mother always said, if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. But I've had to not do that much in my,
No, but you are right. It is disappointing. Yeah. Yep.
But hepatitis B, for example, which is given to all babies, even though it's really only needed for the babies of mothers who are hepatitis B positive, which it's typically going to be a drug abuser, a prostitute, someone who's gotten a bad blood transfusion. And that vaccine was either tested 4 days or 5 days. Now, it's being tested in a baby who can't talk. The parents who are being asked to interpret their baby's symptoms have just had the baby, so they don't know the baby very well. So you're really only going to identify really obvious things like seizures or fevers, but you're not going to notice subtle neurologic impact. And for example, if your baby cries all the time, you're likely to be told by the nurses or the physicians that your baby has colic or is just irritable. So that was one very egregious example of not doing enough, in my opinion. And honestly, the reason that behind the scenes, they made the decision to give it to babies on day 1 or 2 of life was trying to capture their audience because they knew that the people at risk wouldn't necessarily show up for the shots. And so there's this sort of implicit assumption that it must be fine for everybody if you're going to give it to everybody in order to catch those people. And in my hospital, we knew hepatitis B status of women. And I can remember so clearly, I was at a pediatric departmental meeting one time, And the chair of the department was saying, I can't figure out why we can't get to 100% on our hepatitis B vaccines. And I was like, that would be me because I'm actively advising against it. It just did not make any sense to me at all. And there's some concerning data. That vaccine on the first day of life is associated with increased neurologic abnormalities, including an increased rate of autism. And so that's one that I really try to delay until the child's at risk. The other thing that didn't make any sense to me is that the age of risk is really when the child becomes sexually active or starts doing drugs. And the babies that get the hepatitis B vaccine in infancy, sometimes their antibodies are gone by the time they're about 7 or 8 years old, according to the Japanese data. And so we give it when they're babies, when they don't really need it. And then when they do need it, it's not working for them anymore. So I think that needs a real overhaul.